And well, Africa has experienced a number of natural disasters in recent months. In South Africa specifically, we've had hailstorms, floods, fault fires. Joining us to discuss insuring against natural disasters is Peter Todd. He's CEO at Mutual and Federal. Peter, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. Well, as I've highlighted, we've seen quite a few natural disasters take place in South Africa, and with that, an influx of claims coming through on your end. What kind of increase have weather-related events actually triggered in terms of the claims that have come to your doorstep, and is it entirely unexpected being in South Africa?
Well, I think what makes it quite shocking is the fact that the recent claims happened in about a 3-week period. So from the hailstorms to floods, and then obviously the big fire in St. Francis Bay. So that's pretty unexpected. So we would expect to have catastrophe events in a normal year, but to have sort of 3 in a row in that space of time is very unexpected.
These statistics, I mean, you've obviously got very, very sophisticated statistical models. Is there empirical evidence, statistical evidence, that over the last couple of years there have been more incidences of natural disasters, so-called acts of God? Or if you smooth it out over 20, 30 years, is it the same as it's always been?
Well, in fact, we've had a couple of years of fairly benign claims experience. These are very cyclical, and I think if you look at it over an extended period, hopefully you would get a normalized pattern. But what you do see is a concentration of values. So as populations migrate towards the urban centers, and you start to have the weather-related catastrophes, the losses in terms of values and also numbers because of more people, they certainly increase. So you will see the numbers go up, but not necessarily the number of incidents, although the weather, as we all know, is highly unpredictable. So with global warming, we would expect to see a trend of that actually increasing in terms of incidents of weather-related losses.
So when it comes to your risk modelling then, Peter, I mean, what exactly are we looking at here? How do you plan for something as unpredictable as the weather?
Well, we employ a lot of clever actuaries who do that for us. So it is a bit of crystal ball gazing, looking into the future and trying to predict that, looking at past patterns as well to see what those trends are. But we would also look specifically at scenarios in terms of accumulation of risk. So if you take the St. Francis Bay fire as an example, you've got a classic accumulation because you've got a whole lot of homes with thatch roofs in a very concentrated area on the coast with a lot of wind. In fact, it's easy in hindsight to say, well, it's an obvious concentration of risk. But the actuaries would look for those type of concentrations and then highlight what is the potential exposure that could present in the case of an incident. And then we would buy our own insurance. So we go and buy reinsurance to protect us above our own risk appetite.
Peter, if you look at that St. Francis Bay scenario, which was horrible, 80, 90 homes destroyed, I suppose you could say that it was injudicious of the builders to have a concentration of thatch in an area that is notorious when it comes to periods of drought and also wind and people having briars, etc., which apparently is what has happened. But a couple of the cases that you saw in the more popular newspapers said that a couple of the homeowners, maybe more even, were uninsured because it was too expensive to insure thatch. Thatch, for example, and is that something that's going to become a trend? Because you can sort of say, well, global warming means that there's going to be more incidences of natural disasters, therefore we're going to bump up our premiums. You seem to be knocking a few people out of the market.
Well, there is always a premium for thatch, so it definitely costs more to insure a thatch home. I think if you're living in St. Francis Bay now, looking towards your insurance renewal, you can expect to see an increase even if you weren't impacted by the fire. Because although we try and do the modelling as best we can, having had a live example, it's much easier to ascertain what that potential output from that model would be. So certainly there will be a premium in terms of the thatch. And I guess, when those homes are rebuilt, the question is, will they rebuild with thatch or will they use slate, which is acceptable now in St. Francis Bay? But unfortunately, I think when people do town planning, etc., they probably don't consider too much in terms of what the potential risk factors are, and possibly that's something which developers need to be considering more often.
Of course, Lindsay touched on the cost of cover and that the one side of the coin. On the other side of the coin, to what extent are you starting to see new clients come your way because they've realized that they aren't adequately covered and it's just too expensive not to be covered?
Look, I think most people would look to buy some form of insurance cover. I think what you might find happening is that people don't realize that they either don't have the right cover in place or inadequately covered. So I think it's important that people do seek advice when it comes to their insurance. Particularly if you take a holiday home, and the nuances around holiday homes being unoccupied for periods of time, etc., does mean that it has a very different risk profile from an insurance perspective. And those issues need to be highlighted to the insurer because they can make the difference between your claim being paid or not paid. I think getting advice around the insurance that you need to buy is also very important.
Peter, we were talking about holiday homes, and there's only a tiny fraction of the South African population that are lucky enough to have a holiday home. Let's broaden the discussion now to South Africa's insurance cover in general. And it's an Insuring Africa Day. Are we underinsured?
We definitely are underinsured. If you just take motor insurance, we estimate that you've probably got 70% of the cars on the road that are not insured at all. So that's clearly an issue, from a third-party liability perspective. So that is something that we are, as an industry, lobbying with government to say, do we need to look at compulsory third-party insurance, which is, fairly common in other countries and even some of the African countries. So I think, generally speaking, in South Africa, from a penetration perspective in terms of general insurance cover, we are in a much better position than the rest of Africa, where the levels of cover are much, much lower. But by international standards, we still lag.
Of course, when it comes to South Africa and you're looking at a better penetrated market, it forces a company like yours to become a lot more innovative in the kind of products that they're actually bringing to the consumer. Just how an aggressive a drive have we seen on the innovation front?
I think a lot of that is also about the low-end market. So how do you cater for that market where affordability is a serious issue? So there is an initiative being driven by the regulators to try and create a differently regulated environment that we refer to as micro-insurance, and it's been very successful in other emerging economies in Asia. So it's trying to adopt that model, which will facilitate insurers like ourselves to develop products that are suitable for that market. And a lot of it's got to do with limiting the cost of compliance, which is a big factor in the cost of our normal insurance product. But so it's trying to create that socially responsible, environment for insurance products to be developed.